You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about 2023's holiday horror slasher directed by Eli Roth. We're talking about Thanksgiving. Here we go.
They let the owner of like the fake Walmart, he does not die in it, right?
I don't think he does. I mean, they definitely threw him out there as like a red herring.
There's a lot of red herrings.
Well, how about we get started on the Fan2Fan Podcast? I'm Bernie, Pete, and we have Fan2Fan guest Graham. Graham, thanks for coming back and chatting because we have a fun movie that we all want to talk about.
Yes, thanks for having me.
It's funny that you're thankful for having you on, because we're thankful that you're here, and we're also are thankful about our movie that we're going to be discussing this episode, which is the 2023 Eli Roth fake trailer to real movie Thanksgiving.
This holiday season, prepare to have the stuffing scared out of you. Thanksgiving. In the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts, the fourth Thursday in November is the most celebrated day of the year. The table is set. The festivities have begun. When an uninvited guest has arrived, and this year, there will be no leftovers. Thanksgiving.
So can I like back it up to 2007 Grindhouse? For me, you know, when I see a trailer and it's really got me excited, I'm all in. I can't wait till it come out. And Grindhouse was one of those, you know, as a big fan of Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, you know, them combining, I was just foaming at the mouth.
Did you see Grindhouse in the theater, or did you see the...
Yeah. So the buzz around Grindhouse was just huge. And, you know, this was April 2007. And this was back when I worked for a TV station. And so part of the requirement is like they give you a TV. So you're supposed to like monitor cable channels so we can then steal local advertisers who are advertising on cable. So that morning, it was the Friday it came out. My buddy and I were planning to see it that night, opening day. So it was on, you know, the press tour was on CNN, and they were just hyping it up so much. The anchors were like, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. You know, I text my buddy, I'm like, hey, I'm actually kind of worried this is going to sell out. What I'm going to do is like eat my lunch at my desk, and then I'll run and get our tickets for like the 7 p.m. showing. So we'll make sure we're golden. So we get there, and of course, it's like us and like 13 virgins there. And no one else. I just couldn't believe how dead the movie was. But like the 13 of us that were in there were nonstop just hooting it up, loving it. And so those fake trailers, and right when we saw the Thanksgiving trailer, we're just going nuts, like crying, laughing. It's one of the funniest things we've ever seen. It's one of the most shocking things we've ever seen, right? I mean, when that girl spread eagles on the knife on the trampoline, we were just, and then we're just losing it on top of everything else, like Machete. And it has like the most absurd voiceover, you know, it's, you know, kind of gargled, but I mean, he knocked it out of the park for the fake trailer.
Did you notice anything about it?
He was dressed as a pilgrim. And he had a John Carter mask on.
Someone's out for revenge, and they're turning it into a sick holiday game.
Our names are at the table. These seats are for us.
Thanksgiving, rated R.
So when it was announced that, you know, he's going to make this trailer into a real movie, you know, at first I kind of had some reservations because, let's just face it, Machete was good, but it didn't really knock it out of the park. this movie delivered. So, I just finally got to see it when Netflix showed it. And, I'm like 10 minutes into the movie. I'm texting Pete already. I'm like, this Walmart scene is absolutely perfect.
Pete, did you watch Grindhouse in the theaters?
I did, yes. I think I had a similar experience to Graham. I saw that in DC, and I went to a matinee show, and I don't remember how many people were in the audience, but I'm going to guess it. Well, I'm not going to guess. I know for a fact it was under 20. So we can put his 13 virgins and my 13 virgins together in a room, and then maybe we'll have a few less virgins. Who knows? Who's to say? But yeah, no, similar reaction. Like everyone was just kind of, the people that were there were all just kind of going mad for it. But yeah, like the interludes with the trailers was just one of those. I don't remember if I knew that was coming in between or not. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, it was just one of those, it was the perfect little palate cleanser before you got to Death Proof. A couple of minutes of like just these wild trailers. And like you said, like the Thanksgiving one, absolutely hysterical. Like the voiceover with like the slightly garbled voice, white meat, dark meat. It had such a perfect feel for kind of that 70s grindhouse exploitation movies that I grew up watching. So, they totally nailed the tone of it. And so I was a huge fan. Like most people, I think, pretty disappointed that it did not do well in theaters, and then hearing all the people like, well, they should have just split them up into two. I'm like, well, that defeats the whole purpose of what they were trying to do. I was fortunate enough to see Thanksgiving in the theaters. One of those, I don't know if I was like super hyped for it, but I have my issues with modern day slasher horror movies. I'm always left wanting a little bit, usually by the third act. A lot of these movies that have been coming out in recent years just kind of lose the plot on me more so than normal with this type of fare. So like you, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was a great homage / throwback to slashers of the 70s and the 80s. Rewatched it last night, and it kind of surprised myself a little bit. I think I liked it a little bit less. I think I was a little more nitpicky the second time around. And we can get into that in a little bit. But I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed what they tried to do with it and what they mostly succeeded with. So I'm glad that it exists. Bernie, what about you?
I don't want to be broken record here, but it's about the same. Like, I don't know how many virgins. There were certainly like maybe low double digits. And I think the story for all this, for anyone who saw it, like the mileage varied on the success of Grindhouse, because you had to be of a certain age to be nostalgic for the era that it was trying to like do a homage to, right? Like the idea of like double features and drive-ins, really poorly dubbed kung fu movies or horror flicks, and not like big budget, top tier type stuff. The era this is throwing back to that Tarantino and Rodriguez were from, but then when it came out, I think a lot of people were like, oh, this is cool. We did. But I think there were even more people that were like, oh, I don't get this. I'm not nostalgic for this like you are. And they just didn't show up for it. And then it felt like it kind of hit the brakes really quickly for something that I was excited to maybe get a lot of inertia. Edgar Wright, don't. I want to see that. I want these trailers to then become real. And then to think like, and I was looking at it, like 16 years between the same mutual memory we all have watching it and now seeing Thanksgiving in the theater, or like Graham, you and I did on Netflix. Wow, it took that long for kind of like the promise of the thing we saw that we wanted to succeed to actually like come to life.
Yeah, it's wild. I think you make a great point about like that time difference between the audience for Grindhouse and what was available to watch it then, because I'm a little bit older than you guys. So I definitely remember like the Grindhouse circuit. I was definitely way too young to be going to the drive-in to see any of that stuff, but I certainly can remember it being a thing. And, and I grew up going to the drive-in quite a bit. So I had an appreciation for it. And I think both of you being huge fans of the genre and being steep in seeing so many of these type movies, I think you guys are, it was right up your alley as well, because while you might not have been around during the time of like the Grindhouse heyday of the 70s and things like that, you certainly were aware of it. You saw it represented in other movies. So I just think as far as like the larger audience goes, that just tended to be like a very small subset of people that would have really, one, gotten what they were trying to do, and then two, appreciate what they were trying to do. So I guess in hindsight, not a huge surprise that it didn't do as well as everyone thought that it might.
You figure it's already like a niche genre, like exploitation. And then on top of that, you're going to double down on something that's even more like esoteric. I think it just makes it hard because to someone that's not familiar with that, and even if you didn't grow up on it, like Graham, like Pete was saying, we're a little younger, but we get like the Grindhouse vibe. Like there's just something about that kind of like low budget filmmaking. It doesn't have a lot of polish. It's a little rough around the edges. You know, Graham, especially you being a Tarantino fan, like I think that's part of his filmmaking DNA.
Yeah. And, people probably saw the runtime. I think you had to invest over 4 hours. I didn't even get a soda or an icy because I didn't want to take a pee break. I was invested, but to like the mass audience, it went over their head if you don't get it. And then there were probably the Quentin Tarantino mass audience that expected like another Kill Bill because that's what he was riding high on. And then they didn't get Death Proof. Like somebody was like, "Oh man, Kurt Russell, the ending was so stupid. He became like such a pussy." I'm like, but that's the point. He's nothing without his car. You missed the point of the movie.
That was like its own thing. And then we kind of see this. The one thing I did see that Eli Roth threw out there, just kind of doing a little reading up for this, is that we know the version of Thanksgiving we saw when we saw Grindhouse in the theater is not the version that we saw that was the theatrical version, right? Like, right. There are very obvious differences. And I saw a version where Eli Roth was talking about why they're kind of not the same vibe. And I don't know if this was like rationalizing it, but I wanted to share it with you guys to see what you thought. So his comment was basically the trailer that aired during Grindhouse was meant to be a piece of like lost fiction. Like it's a lost movie that existed, and he's actually making the remake, like a version of a movie that's a bit more sanitized that would be allowed because you could do a different version of the cheerleader knife trampoline scene, but you couldn't do the one in the trailer. Like that doesn't work. So he was almost out there, in like wrestling talk. It's like a little kayfabe to be like, if we all kind of agree that trailer didn't exist, like it wasn't real, but it's like a piece of lost media, then just assume like my version is the modern day remake, and then we're good. And if you watch it through that lens, this is an interesting way to either rationalize why it's different, or maybe it's just an insight into how he made it. I'm making a different movie, so I'm almost creating this fake lore for both the original and this version.
I mean, you could totally enjoy this modern new version without even ever knowing the trailer existed. And Pete, were a lot of people in the theater for it?
It was decently. It was like the first weekend that it opened.
How many virgins, Pete? How many virgins for this one?
It's funny you should say that because as I got there early, so as people walking into the theater, I kind of just asked them like virgin, and I took an informal poll, and I think we got like 17 in this one out of like 37.
I mean, this one's theatrical run was considered a success.
Yes,
and it even like I think it made like 46 million worldwide when all was said and done. So you look at that from like modern film box office and be like, oh, that's really not much. But I don't know what the budget was for this. And there was
15 million.
15? Okay. So it turned a profit. And there was a time when these type of movies, like, in the 80s, slasher movies would make 30, 40, 50 million. And I know like we're adjusting for inflation now, but they were usually made on such a shoestring budget. Friday the 13th series being, a great example of this, of how it had such a good run, was that they were made so cheaply, you could make $30-40 million and turn like a really great profit, and then just turn that around and invest a little bit less in the next one and still just try to churn out that money-making thing. So between the critical, acclaim that this got and the audience, it certainly was a hit. It wasn't like a blockbuster hit, but a hit.
And it was a hit, seems like, for all of us, because Graham, like you enjoyed the movie.
Oh, highly. And going back to kind of what you set up, like how Eli viewed this from the trailer. So if you look at the trailer, it clearly doesn't really bring up a Black Friday, because back by the look of that, if we're talking late 70s, early 80s, well, there wasn't a Black Friday. So with the years past, Black Friday has gotten more disgusting on an annual basis, So to be able to tie that in and do this opening scene at like the fake Walmart worked tremendously for the film.
It definitely modernizes it. So, all right. So you've at least done now one Black Friday type thing, Graham?
I think 2 or 3, yeah. It became a nice family tradition where my wife and her sister, and then her husband, he and I would do some drinking in the car, and we would go into the stores with them. But it was fun, we'd be buzzed going in and shopping and everything, and we'd have a good time. I was a little annoyed that I didn't see any bigger fights, some heated exchanges, but I never did see anything physical. But we haven't gone in a few years. And then I think people have brought back the sanctity of stay the hell home on Thanksgiving. Why aren't you going out on Thanksgiving?
And so you just so we're clear, you've never taken a waffle maker out of the hands of some concussed individual lying on the floor of a big box store?
He was bleeding from the neck, and he still was holding on to that waffle iron like his life depended on it.
A little blood on your hands for good waffles feels like a pretty fair exchange.
Yeah, but no, you kind of hit on. I was going to ask you guys the same question about like the Black Friday thing, because I personally have not partaken or experienced in that Black Friday mania. I can still remember. And I'll date myself again, when the Cabbage Patch craze hit. And this is when this first kind of really started, when you had like people getting trampled to get Cabbage Patch Kids. And I was a teenager around that time. And I'm just kind of like, this seems really silly on top of being very horrific and sad. But I just thought the whole practice of it was silly. The closest thing that I can that I've witnessed that comes close to this bonkers opening scene for Thanksgiving, and it is bonkers, and it sets up the movie really well, because it kind of goes there. My girlfriend and I used to go to Six Flags Great Adventure. In October, they would do like the Halloween Fright Fest type thing. And so we would like trek to New Jersey, and we'd go during the week, take off work, and the park wouldn't open until 4, and you just kind of go have a great time, and everyone was like dressed up and all the scares and all that. And we got there, and I remember waiting in the parking lot, and it was pretty crowded. And so like everyone kind of coalesced around like the entrance gate of the park waiting for it to open. And I remember when they opened those gates, people just started booking it. Like they had to be the first one on like the Great American Screen Machine or whatever the fuck they were going on. And there was like, one of those like chain link, a low hanging barrier that they didn't quite get down. People tripped over this thing, and it was just a free for all of like bodies like falling over one another. Thankfully, I don't recall anyone getting hurt from it. But again, it was one of those like, you're at an amusement park, like just the need to kind of just be burst forth from like being penned in was like, it was wild. But I will give credit to Eli Roth for the opening of Thanksgiving, because he kind of captures that in just a completely insane way that just kicks off the movie in a way that I think, when you're kind of announcing yourself as like, I'm bringing back that retro slasher feel, taking a page from a lot of those movies that we grew up with. Like that opening scene is usually setting some kind of stakes. It's either setting the motivation for what the killer is going to do, kind of introducing you to that world in a way that you're trying to grab the viewer, and hats off. He does it.
That scene anchors the movie, like the tone, because when I think of Eli Roth movies, and I don't necessarily love his movies, because I always kind of think they're kind of synonymous with like a little bit more gore than I prefer. I'm not opposed to gore, but when I think of the 80s slashers that this is a nod to, like that's a good level of gore. I'm happy with that. A little bloodier, I'm cool. Eli Roth, like, the quote unquote like splatter porn, it's a little more extreme than I prefer. That's why I've never really seen Saw movies or Hostel. So you hear this and I'm like, okay, I hope it's like the trailer, which feels like it could be John Carpenter's Thanksgiving. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I like that. And then to see that first scene, it feels like there's a bit of restraint. And I think it's a nice also scene where they kind of set up a lot of the characters. So you get a bit of the dynamics. And it's not like any of these people stands out. Like they're all meant to be the tropes. You get the jock, you get the final girl, you get the introduction of all these red herrings. we're going to show you this very traumatic event, and then we're going to show you all the people that were there. Because, by the time this like 8-10 minute scene is done, the people that survived, they're the only people that are standing. So one of them is going to be the killer. That's why that scene is so successful. And then also the fact that like you still see a little bit of what I presume to be that Eli Rothness, right? Where it's like the piece of glass and the stomping and like all that stuff that I think another director actually would be like, yeah, we could just show quick shots, but we don't have to linger. And I think Eli Roth is like, no. Let's leave it there for like extra second. Let's a little bit more blood. Like that's what I want to show.
Yeah, he pushed it with Gina Gershon getting scalped basically with her hair entangled in the cartwheel. But where you'd say setting up the characters, they really set up that diner lady to be a mega bitch.
Everyone is awful. Like there are very few redeeming characters in this. They're all set up to kind of be like really just shitty people. And so you're really kind of rooting, like, yeah, you're rooting for the waitress at the diner to get hers. Like everyone is just, it's kind of just sets you up to be, that was like one of the things that as I was nitpicking, because that's like the latter day slasher stuff where they're like, it went from your characters being one note and not great actors, but they were still meant to be likable characters as opposed to, I can't wait for this person to how's this person going to get killed? And this leans more on that latter slasher era of all the people are horrible and you want them all to die.
When the diner's lady's fighting with the waffle iron, and I heard it and I was laughing, but I was like, did I hear this quote right? Let me rewind it, put the closed captions on. I know I text Pete about this, but she says to that guy, like, you Muppet, you Jim Henson motherfucker, go back to Fraggle Rock. I lost it. Because, I grew up on Fraggle Rock. I'm like, why the fuck would they even bring up Fraggle Rock in 2023? And, that's like the quote of the movie.
As someone that lived in Boston for 14 years, I definitely appreciate it. They leaned in heavy on, because it takes place in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It leans heavily on a lot of like those New England tropes. So like, yeah, at the beginning, the woman's yelling at the waitress, like, two things, me hitting you, you hitting the floor. And then, the guy's like, everyone needs to just be patient. And then the one douchebag yells back at him, saying, you're going to be a patient in Mass General. If you grow up in the area, these are all just like references that are just going to hit home. And so, it's a little pandering, I guess, but most of the actors did a pretty good job with the accent.
The one thing too, I was going to say is that one of the people we've talked to about horror movies, Josh Spiegel, he's got the YouTube show Movie Timelines. You have to remember when we're watching these horror movies, the only consistent thing in a lot of these horror franchises and these movies that we grew up with is the killer. It's the villain. And we know Jason's going to survive. He's going to go after a bunch of teenagers. So in some ways, they matter a lot less than the killer and the actual killings that he does. So if the killings are interesting, they're novel, then it works. And I think that's, again, why I think we all really like this movie, because when you see the really bitchy lady with the waffle maker get her comeuppance, like it's not a quick throwaway. It's run around the diner, barely survive, the whole freezer scene. You went from the Black Friday massacre to this first kill. I think that's why, at least for like that first hour of the movie, the tone, the kills, the fact that I know all of these people could be the killer or none of them could be the killer. I appreciated that. You're at least giving me the things that I'm expecting from a movie like this.
Yeah, and I think, there's some things that this movie does that are pretty on the nose, but there's also some clever stuff that it does as well. And you're talking about that first kill in the diner. That to me, I thought was like an example of something that was clever, because the whole setup is again, it's something that we've seen before many, many times. Like, she's closing up shop for the night and, there's a John Carver mask on the counter. And so, bad shit's going down, and you really kind of just want to see how. And, to kind of take something that you have like this expectation, but then to stretch it. And I'm talking specifically of when he grabs her and like dunks her head in the sink. And again, that's a scene that we've seen in many movies, many different times. You got the POV from, looking in the sink as her head's dunked in. So you're seeing her face, but to then open up the freezer and shove her face against the freezer And so now her face is stuck to the door and her hand. And then when she goes to like pull away, again, it lingers. So you see the skin coming off. But then again, to take it to that next level on top of it, she's trying to call for help and she's got the cell phone. And we all know like the modern tropes with the cell phone. It's like the easy thing is like no service, can't call. But she's got the service, but her fingerprints are literally ripped off on the door. So she's trying to swipe and the blood is on the screen. So she can't do the facial recognition. And I thought that was just a really clever way of taking something, you know, that we all come to expect from these type of movies, but also introducing the modern aspect of it with the cell phone, ramping up the tension a little bit more. And I don't think this movie has a ton of tension, but for that scene in particular, in that moment, it just kind of like, oh shit, yeah, she's not going to be able to use this phone at all. So she's going to have to think of some other way to get out of this predicament. And like you said, Bernie, spoiler alert, she doesn't.
She does not make it through. That's for sure.
Thanksgiving is a time for appreciation. It's a time to remember our many blessings, to celebrate with the ones that we love the most, and it's time for all families to be together. Let's see.
So Graham, let's kind of break it up into some sections here, right? Let's just stick with the cast.
I love anything that stars Ronald Miller, the lawn boy. So that was a big incentive to see it alone. I mean, kind of like the fact they didn't pick anyone like too familiar. So these young people were kind of unfamiliar to me. But then I love her dad who did own the Walmart. You know, I've seen that villainous face a million times. He was really well cast. Gina Gershon, awesome.
Yeah, and we'll throw out the spoiler alert because we will spoil the ending of this at some point. So just for those of you that haven't seen it, just to be aware. Yeah, so yeah, you got Patrick Dempsey who's pulling, I guess, a bit of a different kind of Ronald Miller scam in this one, as we'll get to. I did read, I thought it was interesting because I love Gina Gershon, and you know, the more that she's in movies, the better we all are for it. And so she doesn't last very long on this one, but I did read that she, I guess, had texted Eli Roth at some point before he was making this and was like, when are you going to put me in a horror movie? And he's like, it's funny you should mention that. So she kind of like texted her way into this one. And then everyone else, yeah, I think like Graham, like you said, I thought the teenage young adult cast was fine. I didn't think anyone really stood out. I was like, this is all kind of one note. And then I had to stop myself to be like, that's kind of the point of these movies. The characters are supposed to be one note. So, looking for a ton of character development in something like this tends to be a bit of a fool's errand. So I kind of checked myself there before I wrecked myself and just kind of pulled that one back to be like, maybe I'm expecting a little too much from what should just be a retro slasher. So, the guy that played the owner of the Right Mart, perfect punchable face against all reason, is like keeping the store open for Thanksgiving, even after the horrible events of the year before. They set up a little bit of like that class. It's never really like a direct conflict, but you've got him and his family and his daughter. And then you've got, the Gina Gershon and her husband who's like the manager at the place. And that they're having like their very nice, tidy little, bring your own Thanksgiving, and meanwhile, the rich folks are having their like super, fancy dinner. And so it doesn't really play off too much of that class stuff, but it's there. And I think it touches upon that. It's a pretty small cast, all things considered. I mean, there's a lot of people involved. And again, it's kind of like a 10 Little Indians thing, the way that it's set up, where like all the characters are introduced. They're all in place at the beginning during that stampede at the Walmart, so that the next year, when we jump ahead a year, everyone's on the table as to who could be the killer. And it's really just about the fun of how they can, through editing and through dialogue, kind of lead you on the way to be like, oh, maybe it's this person or maybe it's not. And again, that's another one of the clever things that I thought that they did. They kind of set something up, like the deputy shows up and like the waitress gives him or maybe Dempsey gives him like the John Carver mask, and then he's like, I can get used to this. And so it's like that ominous thing, and then it immediately cuts to an axe embedding into the target, like the axe throwing thing, but it cuts to another scene. But all of that is just kind of playing with your head a little bit to be like, well, he could be the guy, or maybe it could be this guy, and then where that misdirection goes. So, I appreciate all that. I think, like I said, there's some clever stuff to this that makes for a fun viewing experience.
I will say that stick with the red herrings, because they threw a lot of them out there, and I think they also did a good job of never lingering too much on the John Carver character, where it could lead you to believe that it could be the older guy who owns the Right Mart, or it could be even his fiance, could be the townie guy, or it could be, like you mentioned, that new sheriff that's in town. It could be any of these people, and I think they did at least a good job of setting up all that. And then on top of that, the main teenage cast to say, well, now we've got the guy who's lost his baseball aspirations. He would make the most sense. So I think that's also in a movie and where there's a lot of tropes, there weren't many interesting characters, but the thing that made them interesting is when they were legitimate, viable red herrings until that other person is eliminated, and then the group picture gets smaller.
Yeah, there's literally anyone could have been the killer, and this goes back again to my second watch. When I watched it the second time, obviously knowing who the killer was, I was looking a little bit harder at okay, let me see where this misdirection was. You can kind of see it. There's nothing overtly obvious there, but they did a good enough job of quote, covering their tracks. So there's no glaring thing of well, how could he have gotten from this point to that point? It makes no sense. From my second viewing, I'm it all kind of makes sense, and it works on some level. The one scene that I was really looking hard at was when they're at the school and there's the attack. I'm trying to remember. I'm misremembering. But the whole thing is set up where the police are at the school, and then they go back inside, and then the jock and his girlfriend are we're gonna go down the hall, and we'll all leave together. They get accosted, and then there's that whole play with the cell phone where with Jess, I think the main final girl is trying to find her friends. And then she has to battle the John Carver guy because Dempsey appears outside in the parking lot. And then you've got the sirens and the lights going on around the school. Then you're wondering well, how does he get there and get dressed? But it does kind of work where he just disappears, and you see the deputy and see the other officers, but you never see Dempsey until after the fact. So again, there was some thought into, I think, covering their tracks to make it kind of work and kind of plausible there.
You get that movie logic where you can almost imagine the scene we didn't see is him going to his deputies and saying, hey guys, I'm going to check the perimeter real quick. I'll be back. But then just to go into the school to go after them. That scene, and then kind of going back to the cast, is that the final girl, when you brought up her name, that was probably the one disappointing thing, is the final girl. Because there was something a little unremarkable, and I get it. She's not Laurie Strode. She's not Nancy from Nightmare. She's not Sydney from Scream. I get it. I wanted a little bit more from her in a movie that was checking all the boxes for me. I wanted a chip on her shoulder or something just to give her a little bit more personality. The scene at the end is pretty cool considering how it made it personal with the shotgun and everything. I was like, oh, that's cool. But up until that point, I was like, man, I can't even tell you what her name was.
Yeah, I had to keep going back. Graham, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but I agree. I think what they're trying to do is kind of make their friend group more of an ensemble. No one's necessarily safe, and some of these people are going to get killed, and you kind of know that Jess is the main character of this group, but I feel like they were trying to make it a little bit more of this group dynamic where any one of them could have potentially been the hero. Scuba does some things. He turns out to be a decent guy. His buddy, the other jock, is a bit of a goofball, and he's got the video upload after the stampede at the beginning where it's all the video footage and all the people that have died, and then at the end it has the RIP and then, click like to subscribe. Like I thought that was like a funny touch of like, okay, well, that's, for people that are very online, that hits home pretty good.
Before you answer that, Graham, just remember, folks, to like and subscribe. Sorry, Graham, go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, they brought home like the diner lady was more important to me. I kind of like the guy throwing the party, selling drugs and guns.
Oh yeah, you had like the Krull poster and the Death Wish 3 poster on the wall.
Yeah, he's like a super senior Matthew McConaughey from Dazed and Confused, but even more of a townie.
Go back to Methuen, you fucking dorks.
John Carver was one of the first pilgrims and the founder of Plymouth, Massachusetts. Soon after settling, 50 of his fellow pilgrims died mysteriously, with the deaths only ceasing after Carver's passing. Locals left his remains to rot in the town center, but legend has it his spirit still stalks Plymouth.
We're all rooting for Carver. Like, that's the one thing. And I was going to ask you guys, I guess before the kills, what did you guys think of his design?
To still be able to throw in something new in this day and age, whether it's, the Scream mask, you're going up against Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, I thought it was a good spin because I'm trying to think, that's what made the original trailer so funny. Yeah, we have Halloween theme movies, we have the Christmas theme movies, but there really is no Thanksgiving if, my memory serves me right. And so to then capitalize on kind of like the main mascot pilgrim. I thought it was a good look.
The one thing I thought was odd was the one scene where you see the killer in his lair. He's like getting stuff prepped. He's got like the head mask on and like the hat, and it's like there's no one there. Like, why does he need to be in his costume here? And I know, recalling other movies, you've got scenes like that where you can shoot it a certain way that that it's a killer, but you don't have, we get it. We don't need to see him in like clad in all black with like, like the head covering on, typing away at his laptop and, and hatching his evil plan. Like that I thought was a little bit hokey. I'm just kind of like, you could just kind of, you just be dressed normally, and that could have been used as a way to throw another red herring out there, just by people try to see like, ooh, what's this person dressed as? What's the clothing? What's going on here?
Maybe he's like John Carver's like the method actor of serial killers, of slashers, where he never goes out of character.
He did go out of character and become the evil clown in the parade.
That is on my list. So in my notes, I did have like things that I really enjoyed. I liked that scene a lot because it was like the curveball that made the villain even more interesting. Because like, again, I thought like you guys, I like the design. There's something in the simplicity of the character that actually like simple is good. And then you do like the slight variation where his face mask gets burnt. But then all of a sudden to make the killer, yes, he's very one-minded and focused, but not dumb enough to know that a parade that's being set up as a trap for him, and obviously with the inside knowledge that he would be setting up the security for said parade because he is also on the police force. But all these people are going to be wearing the mask, and they're the people that are going to be the targets. So I'm going to do this. And then it gets kind of a little paramilitary with like the smoke bomb and everything. I was like, whoa, okay, this guy's throwing out like flash grenades. All right, this is interesting. Like this guy's now like in the Joker gang or something.
Right, and that probably could have been a hint. Maybe it's Patrick Dempsey because he'd have access to tactical gear.
Absolutely, yeah. But at least it was a cool decision to not go he's just wearing a different kind of Carver mask. Going towards the end, it did feel like at some points it was like 10 or 15 minutes too long. Like I feel a lot of these movies we grew up with were like in that 93, 96 minute range. Wow, this is an hour and 40 something. So towards the ending, I think that's when I felt it. That's when those 10 or 15 extra minutes kind of lingered for me, where I was like, oh, okay, like I think this needs to get a little bit more of the momentum it had early on in the film that really got me. So what was it about the second watch beat that you saw it that maybe, it lost a little bit of its luster?
Yeah, it's nitpicking things. There was just some stuff like I think to your point, when you open up with like that bonkers scene, I feel like the rest of the movie kind of struggles under the weight of trying to live up to that opening scene. Because I feel like I wouldn't call this like a reset of the genre, but this was clearly one of those things of like, we're going back to basics of what made like those movies in the 80s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, like work. And that opening scene kind of really just like threw the doors open of like, all right, well, you can go in all these different directions from here. And then it settles into more of just like your traditional slasher type movie. And it's like, well, who did it? And we got to go from point A to point B, and all these things happen. And what was curious to me was like, I felt like Eli Roth could have gone like a couple of different ways in making this. Like he could have gone with I'm going to do basically take what we did with the trailer and then replicate that into a feature length movie. And so it's got more of that grindhouse feel to it. But then I think I read the same thing you said about how he's like, we're going to treat this as that existed, it no longer exists, and we're remaking it. So this is like a new vision of it. So I'm like, okay, we'll go with that. And then he could have also either played it like completely straight or gone like the meta route of like the screams and things like that. And I feel like it kind of falls in between a little bit because there's parts of it that plays the genre very straight and very true to life and true to, the what's come before. But then there's also those like jokey things that are thrown in there that are clearly jokes as opposed to like the unintentional comedy that you would get from like those 80s slashers that were trying to be serious. And the fact that they were so serious, that's where the comedy came out of, where there's a little more knowing jokes and nods thrown into it. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say is like, in some ways I feel like it's trying to have this movie a couple of different ways at once. And so I think that's why for me at points, it's just a little disjointed, but overall I enjoyed it. So it's not like I'm down on the movie.
I mean, I was texting you during it and after and just kind of like pure joy, having a lot of fun. For a strong slasher, I will say this is probably my favorite slasher since 2011, You Were Next, which was tons of fun.
Bernie, what about you? Like where would you rank this in terms of genre movies that have come out in the last 10 or 15 years?
It's 2024. Movie came out last year. The movies that it's a nod to, we're all 80s kids, but really like Eli Roth is also doing kind of like a nod to the 90s early aughts film. Because the second you said Your Next, Graham, I was like, yeah, this feels more like Scream than some of the 80s films. So it's like, I think there's also something here where like this movie is a little more polished than the original Halloween or My Bloody Valentine, which it definitely like tries to nod to. But also when we were growing up, those movies, Last House on the Left, Prom Night, some of those movies were made by filmmakers that, were also doing homages from like the 60s and 70s. Like that's when we were growing up in our teenage years, right? So you think of a teenager now who's watching this, they have no clue about like the original My Bloody Valentine. They have no clue about like the original Black Christmas. So for them, what we think of the original like Friday the 13th to them is stuff like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream. Right. When I look at it through that lens, this makes sense. It's like, oh, we see how Kevin Williamson loved John Hughes, but also loved 80 slashers. And that's how you get Scream. But then you get something like, I think it's Halloween H2O that was directed by Steve Miner, who I think directed one of the original Friday the 13th. Mm-hmm. But Halloween H2O feels a heck of a lot more like Scream than it does like the first Friday the 13th. That's why this feels like it has a little too much polish. It doesn't feel like the original Grindhouse trailer we saw that I think we all loved. Oh, this is cool. And that's why I'm learning to see this as two separate things. Like, yeah. I'm not disappointed because I'm like, that trailer was cool back in 2007, 16 plus years ago. Oh God, I'm old. But 8 out of 10 things, this one delivered.
Yeah. I will say Thanksgiving then exceeded expectations. It could have fallen flat, but opening scene alone, worth your time to watch this movie.
So they are planning on doing a sequel. Eli Roth announced that pretty early on. 2 of the cast members kind of dropped the fact that they are definitely in the sequel, are Rick Hoffman and Nell Verlack. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but that's Jess and her dad. So like the owner of the
Right Mart.
Yeah. According to them, this movie is supposed to kind of take place like a direct continuation from the end of the first one. We talked about that this isn't a huge cast, but there are a lot of survivors from Thanksgiving, and certainly the ending left it open that Patrick Dempsey is still alive, possibly, maybe, who knows?
And it was a direct nod to My Bloody Valentine too, right? Like after the whole mining thing, the whole
firefighter's outfit. Yeah.
Is that the version you guys want to see, where it's Dempsey who comes back, obviously, with a vengeance, gorier kills. Now he's got some targets on the family, on the girl who did it. Do you want it to go a different route?
Yeah, I mean, they could, I'm assuming at the very least, Patrick Dempsey is a little crisp after the ending of that. So you've got like that trope that you could introduce, but maybe that brings a little something extra to it. Like he's just made even more insane from the fact that he survived like that, the burning or the blowing up of the warehouse. And he comes back to exact even more revenge. You could always take it in another direction. You could, you could bring back a different character that is doing something. I thought it was interesting how they left it. She's still with like the one guy at the end, and you're just kind of like, really, So who knows? I mean, I think there's more stuff they can mine with the people that did survive, and I'm sure that most in the end, or if not all, will be back at some point. And what. Maybe one or two don't last past the first scene. I'm up for a sequel. Let's see where they can go with it.
Also, Gina Gershon's widow. Maybe he's just irate if it comes out that Dempsey had knocked her up and they were going to run away together.
We didn't really talk about that, but that's like the big twist at the end is Patrick Dempsey was, I guess, having an affair with Gina Gershon, and she was about to leave her husband for him. And on top of that, she was also pregnant when she dies. So that was Patrick Dempsey's motivation. But yeah, maybe the husband finds out about all that and he goes, a little cuckoo bananas and starts a little killing spree of his own. I mean, yeah. Before we go, I have a brief quiz that I wanted to throw out at Graham, our guest here.
All right.
This is an exclusive. This is a fan-to-fan exclusive. Never been done before. We're going to play a game called Rank These Roths. So, Graham, on a scale of 1 to 3 with the 3 Roths I'm going to give you, how would you rank them? Eli Roth, David Lee Roth, or Roth IRAs?
Well, I don't know, man. I'm relying on that Roth IRA. But you know damn well how hard I ride for Van Halen. And the only Van Halen I ride for is Diamond David Lee Roth era, because Sammy turned that band into fucking Air Supply. And so, yeah, I will go Diamond Dave, Roth IRAs, and Eli Roth.
Honorable mention Tim Roth. Can we throw him in there?
Oh, we'll save that for the next. Save that for the next round of Rank These Roths, coming to a fan-to-fan episode near you.